One of the first explanations of why humans speak so many different languages is the myth of the Tower of Babel. In the book of Genesis, in the Old Testament, it is said that now the whole world has one language and a common speech. As people moved eastward, they found a plain in Shinar and settled there. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. The Lord said, "If as one people speaking the same language they have begun to do this, then nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and confuse their language, so they will not understand each other." So the Lord scattered them from there over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. This is why it was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole world. In this text, we come across the idea that speaking a single language would be the state of harmony, and that the great diversity of languages is what prevents humanity from fully understanding itself and carrying out its greatest works. But could it be that this great diversity of languages is one of humanity's strengths? Where does this diversity stem from? What are the socio-political, geographical, and ecological factors that outline it? First of all, what separates a distinct language from a mere dialect of another language? The differences in speech between neighboring populations follow no pattern. They can comprehend 100% of what the other says, or 42% or nothing at all. Oftentimes, the cut that separates language and dialect is stipulated arbitrarily as 70% of mutual intelligibility. If neighboring populations with different manners of speech can understand more than 70% of each other's speech, then according to that definition, they are considered as speakers of different dialects of the same language. If the mutual comprehension is inferior to that of 70%, then they are considered as speakers of different languages. But even that simple, arbitrary, and strictly linguistic definition of dialects and languages can be met with a few challenges when applied in practice. For example, it is possible for the understanding to be superior to that or 70%, and yet for the languages to be completely different. Or maybe the comprehension is one-sided, with the two parties achieving different levels of understanding. Another important aspect to be considered that makes this cut even more tricky is that language differentiation also involves ethical and political issues. See then that the concept of a language is somewhat fragile, perhaps because languages are constantly evolving and changing over time, just as the material and subjective realities of their speakers also inevitably change over time. How did the world come to have 7,000 languages instead of one single universal language? After all, for thousands of years, there were opportunities for differences between languages to disappear, as most people had contact with other neighboring people with whom they traded. So how do languages differentiate and remain separate despite these eventual contacts? Well, languages change quickly, even in one decade. Some words go out of style, others are coined and pronunciations change. After a few centuries of independent changes that took place in two geographically separated communities, derived from the same original language community, they end up developing dialects that can make mutual understanding difficult. In millennia of differentiation, communities diverge to the point where they can no longer understand each other, although the languages are still related. And after 10,000 years, the differences are so great that they have no detectable relationships. And because of the basic function of human language, which is to serve as an insignia for a group identity because the people who speak your language are your people. Hybrid languages can be a disadvantage compared to the thousands of separate languages that linguistic communities tend to maintain. The distribution of languages around the world is uneven. About 10% of the world's superficie contain half of its languages. Contrary to what we may think, the biggest countries are not the ones that contain the most local languages. For example, Russia, the largest country in the world, counts 100 native languages, but New Guinea has about 1,000. We can therefore ask, what factors cause such large differences? They can be split into three categories: ecological, socio-economic, and historical factors. Correlations have been established between diversity and latitude, climate variability, biological productivity, and local ecological diversity. On the socio-economic side, the sedentary nature of populations can affect linguistic diversity. Hunter-gatherer communities are known to be smaller in the number of individuals. They cover a larger space than farmer communities, and so they tend to spread their languages to more places. And why in places of difficult access the languages seem to be preserved for a longer time, languages of only a few speakers tend to go extinct at a faster pace. On the same side, the development of bigger political instances leads to homogenization of language and so to the disappearance of languages. The historical factor is highly linked to our last point, for the different conquests that have occurred in the course of history have affected most world regions by imposing on them the language of the invader. This results in a very low linguistic diversity in some regions. It has also been shown that the regions that have been the most affected by those language steamrollers are the ones that present the smallest geographical barriers. An interesting thought to be examined is how the use of language has shifted since small-scale communities and modern-state societies use language in different manners. For example, in small-scale societies, it is very common for the population to be multilingual, and since most languages of the world are spoken only, with no written form, it is very common for people to pick up different languages in a social environment without the need for formal education. Since these communities are in a constant need of negotiating with other neighboring people, multilingualism is essential for survival. In contrast, in modern state societies, there is usually a dominant language, which doesn't make it necessary, in terms of survival, for their people to constantly learn other languages. For example, people born in the United States of America do not necessarily need to know other languages, as they can communicate with most people as they speak English. But even in modern state societies, there are plenty of people who are bilingual or multilingual. That is another arbitrary cut. Some languages are more easily understood in their written form, others in their spoken form. So what makes a person fluent in a language may widely vary. Tongues have flourished with new sounds and form plenty of idioms, only to decay and disappear. Scholars tend to consider the forgetting of languages to be a natural phenomenon. However, modern extinctions are different because they occur at a much higher rate. The waves of extinction of the last 10,000 years have left us with 7,000 languages. But extinctions in the next century or so will leave us with only a few hundred. It is estimated that if the global rate of language loss persists, by the year 2100, almost all languages that exist today will be extinct or dying languages, spoken only by the elderly without transmission between generations. The degree of language extinction varies across the world. As in Australia and the Americas, the situation is critical, while in Africa, most surviving native languages have thousands or even millions of speakers, and smallholders farmers fixed to the land, seem to be clinging to their tongues. Some would argue that minority languages are harmful because they invite miscommunication and conflict. However, most conflicts are caused for political or socio-economic reasons rather than linguistic. Monolingualism is no guarantee of peace. There is virtually no justification for not protecting minority languages, as they are not harmful on their own. One of the pragmatic reasons for encouraging the preservation of languages is the high costs of social assistance and public health subsidies caused by the devaluation of people and languages, which causes speakers to end up leaving their communities and moving to larger societies, thus needing more state help to survive, while peoples with intact languages tend to be economically stronger, maintaining a stable culture and population, which make them need fewer government subsidies and aid. But make no mistake, governmental subsidies are very much needed. In the effort to revitalize endangered languages, policies must be adopted to reallocate financial resources to this end. Financial support and incentives are fundamental and must be more significant than the current derisory fundings aimed at valuing traditional languages and the valuing of the lives of those who are part of traditional communities. Outside the governmental sphere, there are still several efforts that the people may adopt. Linguists can dedicate their studies to languages that are in the process of extinction. Scientists can publish their findings in their native tongues, as well as translate to a wider international audience, and the speakers themselves can promote their languages through transmission between generations and other means. It is in our collective best interest to preserve our great diversity of languages. The team behind this humble project, for one, would like to think that we are calling some attention to this matter and that we are translating against Oblivion. A language shapes the life of its speakers. It dictates the way people think and is directly related to people's beliefs, customs, and feelings. A language is an open window to a people's culture, literature, art, and knowledge. They are whole encyclopedias of the natural world hidden in the letters of an idiom, unique words that name animals and plants on the verge of extinction themselves. In that sense, linguists and biologists are running in a similar race against time, in which the goal is to describe an object of study before it is gone forever. There are thousands of years of accumulated experiences in the sounds people make, in the words people say, in the songs people sing. Preserving a language is a matter of preserving beauty as well. The world we live in is rich and vigorous, and it would be a tragedy for it to become drastically impoverished and chronically devitalized. The word is truth, it's science and laws and empirical testing of the facts relieved. But the word is also beauty and art, and what we believe it to be.